Yo, what's going on, guys? Keep on here for your Nexus King positional guide for Phase 2 and Intermission. Let's go over the P2 Mythic changes real quick. Players are no longer targeted with that big blue circle that you have to take out to place the lasers. Instead, they are predictably placed in the room. Alright, let's talk about the initial positioning. So essentially, the beams will originate in one of two spots. And there's two different stack points depending on where they spawn. So let's talk about the first position that they could spawn is in a pattern like this, to where star is in between two portals. In this instance, the raid is going to be stacking on star. And if it is in the other position, the raid will be stacking slightly left of star to be in between where the beams spawn. Right? And then the tank and the dragon will be on the right side of that raid stack, pointing the frontal, away towards the outside of the room, not hitting the raid. So let's talk about the beams and the beam sets and the beam patterns here. There's 3 sets of beams that go out. The first one is the exact same every single time, and this is the one that includes the dragon frontal. The second and third beam patterns do not include a dragon frontal, so it doesn't really matter dragon positioning after that point. So in this example, I'm going to use that first position just to show relative positioning here. So again, raid stack is going to be on star, and boss is going to be pulled slightly to the right of the raid stack, and then the first set of static beams go off. These beams do not move. They just shoot in the room like this, and then the dragon has a frontal that goes out like that. Again, we're going to use tank externals here, make sure we're mitigating as much of that frontal as we can to reduce raid damage. After that static beam that is the same every single time, one of two beam sets can happen. The beams are either going to be pointing towards the outside, or they're going to be pointing towards the inside. Whatever way the beams are pointing is the not safe place. So again, there's no dragon breath here. This is just positioning for everyone. And you always want to use move speed like time spiral, roar, wind rush, whatever on the second beam here. And then you always want to gate the very last beam in the set. So in this specific instance here, I'm showing as an example that the beams are going to be pointing towards the outside first, which means that the raid needs to movement speed and get into the center of the room, because center is safe when the beams are pointing outward. And eventually, as all of the beams converge here, this is what they'll look like, and we'll have a tiny little space in the center of the room to be safe, right? So don't panic, pixel stack in the middle, and we'll live. As soon as that happens, the set that didn't happen will happen, which is pointing towards the inside. And then in this instance, since it's the very last set, we'll go ahead and take our gate and gateway out. And the beams will then converge all the way out. It is an important note here that the raid needs to be kind of in the ring where star is. If you go too far inwards toward the inner part of the circle, you probably will get clipped with a beam. So just watch your positioning there, be safe. So again, a little phase 2 recap. The initial positioning depends on where the beams originate. So it's either on star or slightly to the left of star. And you're always going to initially position in between these beam circles, right, where the beams are going to originate from. The beam combo recap, again, is a static beam with the dragon frontal that never changes. The beams don't move. And that it is followed either with a beam pointing outwards, which means you need to go to mid, or the beam's pointing inwards, which means you have to be on the outer portion there. So if we're already on the outside and the beams are pointed inside, we can stay. We don't have to move, any of that stuff. And the good news with all of this is that we have to do this twice, right? We do this at the end of P1, and then we do intermission, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then we come back and do this again, except besides the static beam and dragon frontal, which is the same on every set, everything is swapped. So if we had position A with the beams, it will be position B. And if the beams pointed outwards for that first dynamic set, it means they'll be pointing inwards towards the center for the next time we do it. So it makes the second set significantly easier because you know exactly where things are happening and where you need to even pre-position. All right, so that's P2. Let's talk about intermission, specifically intermission 1. I'll talk about intermission 2 in the P3 video because it's pretty quick. We're going to split our team up into 2 and go to our respective sides. Each side is exactly the same with the same timing. So this is going to cover both sides. We're going to start with having everyone kind of play near mid. You should be playing kind of near mid for a majority of this phase. And as I show you the mechanics, it will make sense why. We'll want to have the tank on each side mark the Nexus prints on their relative sides, and we're going to use the interrupt anchor weak aura to assign kicks. And of course, just like every other difficulty, the Titan is the DPS check here. If we have to use potions and lust just to prog this phase, we will. But Titan is prio. So let's talk about the slight changes here for this specific set. The Reapers, which are the small ads, they actually will teleport in a pattern, kind of like a square around the center of the room, around the Nexus Prince, and target 4 people. And what this is, it's exactly like the Kaiveza fight in Nirbar Palace, where you want to bring your lines through the Nexus Prince to basically nuke his barrier that he casts and do damage to him. So it kind of looks something like this. They'll teleport to a square pattern, and then the barrier will go on the Nexus Prince, and then they'll target 4 players. And what you do is you do it exactly like, specifically, if you guys remember the third set in Kaiveza, where you had to take yourself to the opposite side on the other side of the ad. It's exactly what you're doing here. So just watch the movement. For example, the person in the upper left went down to the lower right. And so the beams end up looking like this. And you want to go to the opposite end of the ad so you don't accidentally get clipped by 2, because that will hurt and you'll probably die. This is literally a copy paste of the Kaiveza beams here. Other than that, the other 2 mechanics in here, the beams are not new. We've seen that before, but the mortar that the Titan casts is slightly new. Generally, we'll want to stack up in the center for the mortar cast and bait the puddles. If you're immobile or tanky ranged, you can go out as well. And then we're just basically baiting puddles. And then we want to run typically as a team and get ready for the beam set. I'm just going to say, as a general rule of thumb, you should run back to like towards the center platform on your respective sides. So in this case, you know, if we came from the bottom of the screen here to this platform, that's where we want to stack. Notice there's 1 ranged off to the side. I'm just giving an example of what a ranged could do if they wanted, if they felt comfortable with not stacking or not being next to a healer. And then after we bait those puddles, they will pop and we get beams. And it's the same as every other difficulty, right? So follow the beams, make sure you're living. Again, we're prioing the Titan as we're going through. And once the Titan dies, you hop back to the main platform and you repeat phase 2 again. And again, I will reiterate that all of the patterns that happen that are dynamic get swapped. So if we had position A first, that means we will have position B second. So, you know, if we had position B on the first set, this set would then be position A. If the beams were pointed towards the inside on that first dynamic beam, then they would be pointed towards the outside on this set. Makes it a lot easy, makes it pretty predictable. And that's it. Phase 2 is pretty straightforward. Doesn't last very long. Intermission doesn't last very long. Phase 2 and intermission. Phase 2, I think, is probably the easiest phase here, and then intermission will probably be a little bit of prog depending on DPS and comfortability with our kicks. But that's it. That's phase 2 and intermission 1, and I'll see you in the next video.